Site plans, very exciting site plans. I'm going to start the site plan lecture just by opening up a blank file. So I'm going to come into start drawing here, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to start a blank file. Before we actually get going on how we're going to draw site plans, I'm going to show you our course manual here. Page 1-62 is where site plan lecture begins, which is in the PDF on page 64. So if you happen to forget something, of course we always have the video, but there's also all of the instructions spelled out in the booklet, right? So we have this here, and couple of things. I want to show you the assignment before we get going, and I want to talk about our layers before we get going. So we're going to have two drawing assignments for this topic. And I think actually in the process of learning how to generate site plans, we'll likely do this first assignment in class. So if you kind of follow along, then you'll have one of the assignments done. So this is going to be the first site plan that we're going to draw, and we'll do this in class together. And this is, we have this secondary site plan, which is going to be, I believe these two are part of the same assignment. So we have this second site plan that you're going to draw. This one is different because not only does it have these straight lines, it also has some curves. So we'll talk about the curves a little bit. And then you're going to have this third site plan that you're going to draw. And you don't know how to do text yet, so I'm going to assign these, and I'm going to have them do after next time so that we can talk about text, and then you can add text to them, and then you can submit the assignments. Okay, so those are going to be your assignments, and this is going to be one. In fact, I'm going to, hopefully, maybe I can extract this page out so that I can, oh, I've got the wrong Adobe open. We'll just leave it like this. So 142, 65. Okay. One thing I want to remind you guys about, I was thinking about it today because it popped up on my little calendar, is that I am going to be gone on Wednesday the 20th. And I think I brought it up like the first day of class, but I'm going to be at AIA 2018. Very exciting, right? American Institute of Architects conference, and it's actually going to be really great this year. It's in New York City, so it will be gone on Wednesday. But I will be here Monday. So so come Monday, but I just want to remind you, and I'll remind you again next week, but I'm going to be gone on Wednesday the 20th. Okay, let's talk about creating site plans. And I think really the first thing that I want to talk about before we even get into drawing site plans is how we're going to organize our drawings, right? And part of that is going to be setting the units. Part of that's going to be how we're going to draw them, you know, what kind of methods we're going to use to draw them. And then the final thing is what kind of layers are we going to use to create these site plans on, okay? The topic of what layer our site plan is going to go on, it sort of falls into the same topic of like when you draw plumbing fixtures in a design project, right? There's two types of ways of drawing plumbing fixtures. You can draw them in the architectural plan, and they're going to be for design intent only, right? Meaning the architect has designed the space, and they've just placed toilets and sinks and showers and different things where they're appropriate in the design, right? So the toilets that are on the layer A- floor P-fix, those are going to be architectural layers. They're for design intent only, right? Which are separate than the toilet fixtures and the plumbing fixtures that are placed by the engineer, right? So those are going to be on, a different layer when the engineer places them. So things like P-fixture, plumbing fixtures, right? That will be a layer that an engineer will use, to place their fixtures. Now, and again, this may be a little bit where Jeff and I differ in our conventions, right? But in the assignments, and he's written these assignments, he calls out for you to name your layers for these site plans with a C in front of them, right? And what that means is that, let me zoom in here a little bit. If you come in here, you'll see C prop, property lines and surveyed benchmarks. C, prop bearings, right? Bearings and distance labels. C, prop, I think we have an easement. Easements are right-of-ways, right? So he has all of the layers for this assignment with a C in front of them, which would indicate that an engineer had drawn them and would be responsible for them in the real world, right? So when an architect is drawing an architectural site plan, right, to indicate design intent, not that they're engineering a site plan, they will have the layers with an A. So A-prop-easement for, an easement they determined, or A-property line for the property line. So I kind of like to make that definition pretty clear to everyone, because I do believe in the assignment. He says, make your layers C-prop, whatever. And you're like, well, I'm not really a civil engineer, so I don't really feel that comfortable using a C-prop, thinking in the real world, right? Some of you will be civil engineers, some of you are contractors, and some are doing different things, right? But in general, if I'm drawing a site plan, it will be an architectural site plan. My layers will be with an A. Okay, so, but it's okay. We're in class here. We can make our layers with C's and take that responsibility, right? I kind of laugh because it's all very nitpicky, but and I laugh because if you were a new intern going into an architecture firm and you started doing layers, people would be all over the place. Oh my gosh, what is happening? Who is doing this? It'd be a big uproar. Anyway. Okay, but the layers we're going to generate, just generate them as they are shown in the assignment. I'll just for today, break my rules and say we're going to do C's for our layers. So we're going to create a few layers. We'll do the C-prop for property lines, and we'll do the probably C-prop easement for easements or right-of-ways. Okay. All right. So I have my drawing open, and this was just a blank drawing, right? And a few things we need to know about site plans before we start. Number one, what layers are we going to use? Number two, what format, what units are we going to use to create our site plans? Okay, and to create our site plans, we are going to set our units to decimal, and we're going to set the precision to 2 digits, and we're going to set our angles to surveyor units, and we're going to set that precision to this format right here. All right. So that's what that's going to look like. We're going to create some layers. We're going to have, see how he says look under C for civil, right? We're going to have one layer for the property lines, and it's going to have a border line type. And then we're going to have a setback or an easement line, and that's going to be a hidden line type, okay? So this is really just kind of laying out all the stuff we need to do first. Then when we get to actually inputting all of our units to create our property lines, essentially, we're going to use a polar coordinate input to generate them, okay? It sounds a little bit more complicated than it actually is. So let's start creating a few of these things and really get into it. And like I said, if you follow along with this first one, you'll have one of the site plans already drawn for your assignment, okay? All right, so set decimal precision to 2 digits. And maybe if I'm very crafty, I can get this to kind of sit over here. Is that annoying? I kind of like everybody to be able to see it. Look at that. I have 2 screens and then I just try and split them. There we go. All right, so I have my brand new blank drawing open. First thing, I'm going to set my units to decimal. I can come down here and I can change my units to decimal here, but that doesn't really give me the option to specify surveyor units or precision. So in this case, I'm actually going to type units at the command line. And I'm going to come up here under length type, and I'm going to change that to decimal. My precision is going to be to 2 decimal units, 2 decimal places. I'm going to change my angle here to surveyor units, right? And my precision will be this precision right here, right? I don't know the term for that necessarily. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like. We're going to do this because whether, if you're a civil engineer, you're going out and having things surveyed, and then the information's coming to you and you're drawing these property boundaries. If you're a design professional, then you will be given, a site plan, and it will have surveyor units on it. And when you are drawing your architectural site plan, you'll recreate it. So that you can place your design on it, right? And you're just recreating it so that you know kind of what the boundary of your property is, and you know how far you can design. But you're still going to have to know how to input these and how to interpret the surveyor units, okay? I'm not a surveyor. I couldn't go out and even tell you anything about surveying, right? But I do know how to input them and to draw things with them. So I'm going to hit OK. And essentially now my drawing board is set. I can start drawing my site plans, okay? Although I need to create some layers first. So I'm going to create some layers for my property line and another one for my setback. I'm going to click on layer properties here. Oop, there we go. Oh, I've got it. It's using my template to start this. So I'm going to click on new layer, C-PROP, enter. And I'm going to change the color of this. We're going to give property boundaries. Civil drawings are a little bit different than architectural, but I think the general convention will be the outline or the property boundary is going to be your thickest line, and then things that are offset in, like easements or setbacks or different things like that, those will be a thinner line, right? And my general philosophy is I just like to see at least 2 steps between thicknesses. So for this, I'm going to do a red outline for the property boundary. And then when I create the easement or the setback line, it's going to be 2 steps lower than that. So green, I could even say maybe cyan. I'll probably pick cyan. Oh, so I assigned red to my property line. Now I need to assign a line type here, because over here it says use a border line type. Okay, so I click on continuous, and I don't see it here, so I'm going to click on load. And I'm going to go down to border. So we have dash, dash, dot, dash, dash, dot. Looks pretty good. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to hit OK. So now my property line is a very thick pen weight. It's red, and it has a border line type associated with it. Okay. My next layer that I'm going to create is going to be C dash, let's see, a setback. So setback. And I'm going to change that color from red to cyan and hit OK. And that is going to have a hidden line type. So instead of, remember, when I create a new layer, it automatically copies the one previous. The previous layer had a border line type. This one, I'm going to click, and I'm going to change that one to a hidden, but it's not loaded. So I click load again. Hidden, OK, and I'm going to click on that hidden line and hit OK. Okay, so I have my 2 layers that I'm going to need to draw my property lines. Okay, so let's start talking about how we're going to draw these lines. I'm going to see if I can open up a second copy of our workbook here, which I think I can. Oh boy, where is it? Okay, so this is going to be the site plan that we're going to draw, obviously. And I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit so that we can see the bearings on here, right? The bearings are going to be in the surveyor units. Before I start drawing, I like to look at what I'm drawing, and I like to somewhat make sense of it, right? So I look at this, and in making sense of it, it's, I'm going to really start being able to tell which direction I'm going to draw this site plan from, okay? And what that means is I'm going to look at the bearings, these surveyor units, and I'm going to determine which direction this was drawn in. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit closer. And I'm going to see that I have a POB, point of beginning, and that is 0, 0. And then I have a line that kind of moves in this direction, And the bearing is south 86 degrees, 43 minutes, 0 seconds east, right? It doesn't, and I say this every semester, it doesn't feel right saying it because those are very clearly feet and inch marks, right? But we have our degrees, our minutes, right, and our seconds in here. So 86 degrees, 43 minutes, 0 seconds east, okay? So looking at this bearing, this is a southeast bearing, right? And if I zoom out on this drawing a little bit, if I were to think of north as upward, east is over here, south downward, and west to the left, this would be going in a southeastern direction, right? So looking at that, it makes sense that if I start here and I'm drawing a southeast bearing, that line makes sense, right? Which is different from looking at this line here. This one goes southeast. So if I wanted to start here and move in this direction, you know, I'm not going southeast, I'm going northwest actually, right? So from this point of beginning, this line heads northwest, right? But if I were to draw from this point down, that southeast bearing would make sense, right? So I guess the first thing I like to do is kind of look at all of the property boundaries and determine which direction this needs to be drawn in, okay? Now, you know, we do the best we can. Sometimes you get to a point in a drawing and you get stuck and you think, wait a minute, that's supposed to be going, maybe the bearing here is northwest, right? And you're like, oh, but I'm going southeast, right? You can generate these lines. I could substitute in northwest here if I wanted to draw from this point this direction. But because all of these other lines, you know, make sense in the direction they're drawn, I'm going to start here, go northeast here, go northwest here, you know, go southwest, and then go southeast, okay? All right, so let's start drawing this property boundary, all right? I'm going to click on my property boundary layer so that I draw those appropriately the first time. And, you know, I have a plan of action. I'm going to start here. I'm going to move this direction and draw all the way around, right? And now it's time for me to actually draw something. I know my units are set correctly. I know that everything in AutoCAD looks good. I do want to say before we begin, when you draw in decimal units, you're drawing in decimal inches, right? It's something pretty important to realize. And I'll tell you how, I'll talk about that in a second. So we need to start drawing. Now, I feel like I was just about to say something very important and it's escaped me. Let's see. Well, I guess we'll run into it, right? Shoot. Well, it's gone. No, we don't. We will scale it after, actually. Yeah, this is something that you'll have to deal with this kind of drawing. Shoot. Well, anyway, okay. I guess we'll just start. There was something I was going to say before I started that, but anyway. All right, so AutoCAD is set. We have our layers. Properly created. They have line weights associated with them. We have the line types correctly set. Now it's time to draw this, okay? So I'm going to zoom into each of these bearings because we are going to have to type into AutoCAD these bearings here, okay? And now the format of these, let me just write on the board what the format of these is going to be because, again, just like everything in AutoCAD, these aren't terribly hard to draw, but there is a process to them, and if we mess up the process, then it doesn't work very well. So we're going to do a distance, and in this case it's going to be 158.21 at an angle of, this one is south 86, and we're going to type D for degrees. We're not going to put in the degree mark. 86 degrees, 43 minutes, 0 seconds east. And that is what we're going to do, okay? And the other thing we're going to do is we have to think about, is this going to be an at, right? Don't forget that. Is it going to be a relative coordinate, right? So we're starting here. We're going from here over to here to here to here to here to here, right? So the first one is going to be, our first input is going to be 0, 0 to get us to the point of beginning. I think that's what it was. And then we're going to, the second point, we're going to do at 158.21. There's no unit on that. We're not going to put a foot mark, okay? If you put a foot mark, it won't work. We're going to do a little angle sign, type in S, 86D, 43, foot mark 0, the quotes mark E, which is the inch mark, right? So that's what the format is going to be like. And if you forget one thing in there, you do it incorrectly, then your line will not be correct. And it might not only not be correct, but it might shoot off into somewhere crazy, okay? And that was a good tangent because my thought just came back to me. So there you go. So when we start drawing, I'm also thinking about what drawing tool to use, right? If I draw these as regular old lines, as it stands today, we don't really know how to use the trim command just yet. And I feel like I'm building it up to be this magical thing, right? But we don't know how to trim yet. So if I look at this and I think to myself, I have to draw this shape, and then I have to offset it in a certain distance, right? If I do that, then, you know, if I don't use a polyline, I'm going to have all these little weird pieces inside that I have to trim off. We don't know how to do that quite yet. So my drawing method for this site plan is going to be to use a polyline, right? And the polyline, we always have good intent with polyline, like, hey, let's use polyline and we'll create this wonderful continuous line. Sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes we have to break the command in the middle and we have to continue with a second polyline and then join them back together, right? Which I feel like sometimes happens on this specific property line. But we'll do the best we can. All right, so I'm going to use the polyline command and I'm going to start at point 0, 0. And so I come up here to polyline. I'm going to type in 0, 0, enter. And I'm going to zoom out a little. And that started my property line, okay? Now I'm going to type in this bearing here, and I'm going to do it in the format on the board. So I'm going to type at, because I'm starting, you know, I'm going from the first point to the second point here. I'm going to type in at 158.21 at an angle of 86D for degrees, 43 minutes, 0 seconds east. That's what it's going to look like when I type it in.
You need the south.
Oh, did I forget the south? There you go. See, if I would have forgotten that, it would not have worked. There you go. Now, if I were you, I'd turn your dynamic input off. Yep.
Is it case sensitive? Like you put a D in?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I've done it both ways, and it's fine. Yeah. Okay, so at 158.21, no foot mark, at an angle of south 86 degrees, 43 minutes, 0 seconds east. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. Looks pretty good. I'm going to try and zoom out. Oop, I can't quite zoom out. I'm going to have to pan over. And already it's getting annoying, and I'm getting that mark right there. That's a constraint on my zoom. So already all of my good intentions of wanting to keep a very nice polyline together are kind of vanishing. But I can use polyline for the rest of these and then join them together, right? If at all possible, we try to use one continuous line, but if it doesn't work, we can work around that. So I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to zoom extents by double clicking on the middle roller on my mouse. And I have this lovely line that does appear as if it goes where it should, right? Okay, my next line is going to be this northeast bearing. So I'm going to come back up here to polyline, and I'm going to click on the endpoint there, click, and I'm going to type at 180.31 at an angle of north 18 degrees, 50 minutes, 00 seconds east. And I get asked all the time, well, if it's 0, 0, do I actually have to put 0 seconds east? And the answer for me is yes, because I don't know what mistake can happen if you don't put that extra 0, right? I don't know enough about surveying to tell you that it doesn't matter to put both zeros or whatever, right? So when you're copying property lines or drawing property lines, copy those bearings exactly as they're shown, okay? Okay. So at 180.31 at an angle of north, 18 degrees, 50 minutes, 00 seconds east. We're going to hit enter. And I feel pretty good about that. That appears to be the same. And in AutoCAD, for me, it's not usually enough to say it appears the same. It'll really come out when we finish this drawing whether or not it was correct, right? You'll figure it out pretty quick when you finish that final line and things do or don't match up. So I'm going to type at 185.18 at an angle of north 23 degrees, 27 minutes, 40 seconds west. 185.18 at an angle of north 23 degrees, 27 minutes, 40 seconds west. I hit enter. There it goes. Right? We could do these all day. Oh, I'm getting that again, which I don't like. So even though I'm doing a polyline and it kills me, I do have to hit escape and I have to zoom extents, right? You can type regen, R-E-G-E-N, enter, and that will hopefully lift kind of that, that restriction that you get. But as it stands, I have to start again. PL, enter, polyline. I'm going to click on that endpoint. I have this bearing now, so I'm going to type at 205.00 at an angle of south 50 degrees, 50 degrees, 23 minutes, 15 seconds west. So I always check it a second time because it's a pain in the neck when it doesn't work, right? At 205.00 at an angle of south 50 degrees, 23 minutes, 15 seconds west. Enter. And I do have to say, in all my experience with site plans, right, usually like 99.9% of the time, if something isn't working, it's an input. There is some input that you're doing that is making it not work. And sometimes I'll do it and I'll mess it up too, right? But it's usually an input. It's usually you forgot the @ symbol, or maybe you forgot, like I did, the first directional input, or I think one of the biggest mistakes is that people see the foot mark on the 205.00 and they put it there, not even thinking about it, right? When in actuality, that doesn't need to be there. So I would say if you make a mistake and it doesn't get drawn the way it needs to, then I would just kind of hit escape, clear out the command, right? Don't continue to use the same dimension over and over again. Type it in again and see if you can get it to work. Okay, we have the final leg here, and it's so tempting just to come down here and object snap to the endpoint, right? But we never do that, right? No, shame on you. Because if there's a mistake, we want to catch it on the drawing board, right? So it's tempting, but we always just want to draw it out, right? And figure out if there's a mistake on the site plan. So always draw it out. And I'm always tempted. I'm like, I know, like, generally it's always right, but you always want to make sure. So we come in here and we draw it out. So I'm going to type at 201.36 at an angle of south 4 degrees, 24 minutes, 48 seconds east. Okay. And hit enter. And everything looks great. Although I have to say, so these assignments were generated by Jeff, obviously. They mostly work, this one's the teensy bit off, right? There are a couple where they just there's a tiny little gap here and there. And I think it's just because he made them up, right? So we might get a tiny little error like that. That's acceptable to me here, right? But if you had blatantly something that was like that, right? That's something that you're going to want to investigate, right? Professionally, you have something off or things don't connect, or that, something is wrong. You either have too much property or too little, or, you're going to figure out what's going on there. All right. So this looks wonderful, right? I had to create a couple of different polylines. So I'm going to join them all together. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to go to my, my polyline edit. There it is. My polyline edit, which is also p-edit on the command line. P-edit, enter. Oop, let's close that up. P-edit, enter. Select the polyline, and I want to choose multiple, so I click on multiple. Select all of those lines. Hit enter when I'm done selecting. AutoCAD needs to know when you've finished selecting. And we are going to join these lines. I could type J and hit enter, or I could click on join. Enter the fuzz distance. We're just going to hit enter through that. And it says 3 segments were added to your polyline. But this again is one of those commands where it's like, okay, hey, what do you want to do next? We don't want to do anything more, so we're just going to hit escape. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to make sure that yes, indeed, my polyline did get joined. Okay. Now here is the tricky part. Okay. I am going to offset this now with the 20-foot increment here. Okay. So.
Sorry, what was the last step you did on the p-edit?
Let's look. Oops. You have to look. So we select, we hit enter. Oh. We join it, we hit enter. I think it says something like fuzz distance, is that right? I don't think it's telling me here because it's already joined together, but it says fuzz distance and you just hit enter for yes.
Oh, just enter for yes.
Yep. Nope, you're good. Okay, so.
Doing it the first time for some reason.
And every now and again that happens, right?
Yeah.
So just do it again, it should work.
Yeah.
All right, so here's what we're going to do now. We are going to, we're going to scale this up first. Yes. I'm questioning myself now. Let me see real quick. I have to test it. I'm questioning my... Check something real quick. Back to architectural. Okay, nope. I shouldn't have questioned myself, right? See? Okay. Oh, and I've killed my p-edit by doing one too many undos. P-edit, multiple, select all my objects, enter, and J for join, enter, enter, and they've been added. Okay, so here's what we're going to do next. We do have this this setback here that we need to generate. And so we're going to take this nice polyline that we've generated, whether it's, joining them together or creating a polyline the first time, and we're going to offset it by an increment of 20. Okay, so I'm going to use the offset command over here, and I'm going to type O for offset, enter. You can also find that up here in modify. I'm going to type in 20, enter. Not 20 feet, I'm going to type 20 because we're in decimals, right? So I'm going to click, click. Does that make sense, what I just did? I'm going to hit undo. O for offset, enter. 20, enter. Click on my shape, click to the inside, right? See it previews. Ooh, look at that terrible gap on the bottom, right? Click to the inside, click. There we go, right? All right, so it looks pretty good. I'm going to grab my easement line and I'm going to change it to the actual layer it needs to be on because it duplicated that first layer, right, by offsetting. So I'm going to use the drop down, change it to setback, and everything looks pretty good. I've got my general shape created, okay? But now here's the tricky part, right? If you are using this in a civil application, you're good to go because you're going to be working in these units and it's great, right? But if you want to use this in an architectural application, so that includes everyone but engineers, right? You're going to have to take this and you're going to have to convert it to architectural units so you can use it. And what that means is that we are going to have to scale it up by a factor of 12. Okay, so by doing this, I'm going to show you how to use the scale command and also how to take this object and take it from decimal inches to feet and inches. Okay, and that's the scale factor is 12 in that case. Okay, this is in this exercise, Everybody always does really well drawing the whole thing. Everybody does really well layering it, and then they forget to scale it up, right? Tiny little points taken off assignments, which we don't like. So just make sure that that final step, that the scaling, that you do that, all right? And what I like to do, because AutoCAD is kind of this very generic drawing board, right? I like to, and I delete this when I'm done, but I like to just draw something kind of off to the side here, and I like to make it like, I just make it an increment of 1. It's going to be tiny, right? And I like to do that because that sort of gives me a visual indication of whether or not I've scaled my object appropriately, right? I can look at this all day, and I can sit here and hem and haw, and I can measure it in any units really, and say, yes, that's right. Maybe, I don't know. But I like to put something down there so that when I have it scaled, that object is larger and more visible, so I can tell that it's been scaled, essentially. Okay, so let's talk about the scale command, all right? The scale command is this little guy right here. Here we go, right? It pops up a little graphic right there. But essentially what scale will do is it allows you to proportionally scale up or scale down an object. And it allows you to do that with a numeric input. So for example, if I want to scale an object and make it twice the size of the original object, the scale factor would be 2, right? If I want to take an object and scale it up by 1.5 times the original object, the scale factor would be 1.5. If I want to take an object and scale it down by half, the scale factor would be 0.5. Okay, so the scale factors are pretty easy to determine. And the command is actually pretty easy to use, honestly. I click on scale, click. I click and I select all of the objects that I want to scale, click. I hit enter when I'm done selecting, something we do all the time. I'm going to pick a base point. Let me show you how the base point works. If I pick the middle, click, do you see? And this is just previewing. It grows from the center, right? If I pick the corner, it grows from the corner. It does so the base point doesn't really, it doesn't affect the scale. It doesn't break the idea that you're scaling by 1 or 2 or 2.5 or 3 or whatever, right? But it will determine where that object kind of lays in AutoCAD when you're done. So if you have a piece of property and maybe you're scaling a house up to fit it, you know, and you want the house to kind of stay centered, you maybe want to pick your scaling base point as the center of that object so it scales and stays in the same spot instead of maybe the top corner and it goes down this direction, right? Or the bottom corner and it grows up this direction, okay? So we're going to click on scale, select the objects. When we're done doing that, we're going to hit enter. We're going to click a base point, click, and we're going to specify your scale factor. In this case, it's 12. So 12, enter. Okay. And I don't think I drew my little object big enough. Usually when I draw it a little bigger, it does give me an indication. But now I look at this. In fact, that didn't really work very well in this in this exercise. We're going to delete it. In this instance, you know, I look at this and I think, gosh, I don't really know how big it is, right? And I don't know if the scale factor worked really. And if I keep this in decimal format and measure it, I guess really, sorry, the way that I'm going to determine if it did scale up, which it did, we saw it scale up, right, is to measure it and just to see what's gone on. But this is, I feel like, kind of a tricky, sticky point because a lot of times you draw it, maybe you save it, you take it home, you go to print it or do whatever, right? And you forget, did I scale it? And I think actually one of the most common mistakes, I do see people not scaling these, but then I see them scaling it 2 or 3 times because they didn't realize or they forgot or didn't think it worked, right? So if you kind of get stuck in that little cycle of did I scale it right? Is it too big? Is it too small? I guess probably the way that I would figure out if I had done it correct or incorrect is, number 1, I'd measure it, but number 2, if it were too big, I'd scale it back down. Okay, so let's say I scaled this up a second time. Scale, enter. Select these objects, enter. I'm going to click on my base point and type 12, enter. Did scale it up by another factor of 12. I can scale this down, right? And I've scaled it up twice by 12. I'm just going to scale it back down one time by 12. So scale, enter, select, enter, click for a base point, and I can type 1 over 12, enter, and that scales it back down, right? So the scaling goes both ways is my point. So if you accidentally do it too many times, you can scale it back down, and then you can measure it, and if you're lost in it, you can keep scaling it up or down until you find a measurement you know, right? In this case, if I measure this, DIST, enter, this line right here is it's 1898, essentially. So if I take 158.21 and I times it by 12, 1898, right? So you can kind of determine where you're at. And if I still was didn't want to do this and I was lost, I could scale it, down if I needed to. But in the decimal world right now, this is 1898. That looks pretty good. I know that I've scaled it up by a factor of 12 and that now it's the correct size for an architectural application, okay? And you're thinking, well, yeah, but it's still in decimals. I'm still measuring decimals. Well, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to architectural. Okay, so I draw the object in decimal units, then I scale it up while I'm still in decimal units by a factor of 12. That essentially converts it to architectural units. Then I change my units to architectural and it will now be measured in architectural units. Okay, so that's how the system works. I look at this, now if I measure like this setback distance now, I get a distance of 20 feet, right? So I know that that worked. All right, so I have my object here. Everything looks good. Now it's time to print, okay? So determine the scale and plot your portrait on an 11 by 17 inch piece of paper. Okay, a couple things here. I'm going to notice immediately, right? Why are these lines dashed over here and these ones aren't? Right, that's the first thing I'm going to think about. But being new at AutoCAD, you probably think, well, I'm just going to try and print and see what happens, right? So let's try and do that and see what happens. Control P. And I'm just going to print from model space still because we don't really know anything other than model space right now. So I'm going to choose my plotter. I'm going to choose my page size. And I'm going to choose window. And I'm going to this on a nice little page here, so click, click. Center the plot. This wants to be portrait. I'm going to uncheck fit to paper, and we're going to choose, just from having done this, I think a scale factor of 1/16. Oh, nope, that's too big. 1/32 maybe? 1/32 looks pretty good. Okay. I'm going to make sure that I do choose my LaserJet CTB so that the pen weights appropriately read. I'm going to preview this. Oop, not good, right? Not good. So that effort kind of failed, right? I thought, oh, I'll try and print and see what happens. The problem is the last thing that we talked about when we met last time, and that's that the LT scale is off. We need to change our LT scale, okay? And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our LT scale to half the scale factor. And our scale factor was 1/32, which I'm not even sure is on this page, so we may have to finagle this one. View, rotate, clockwise. Okay. So if I look at this scale factor chart, which is where I'm going to get my scale factors shown. Okay. I go all the way up to 1/16, but I don't have a 1/32. 1/32 would be double this, which is essentially this is the setting you're going to use because LT scale is half the scale factor. So if the scale factor of 1/16, right, is 192 times 2, the scale factor for 1/32 would be 384, right? Divide that by 2 and you get 192, all right? So we're going to change our LT scale. I'm going to maximize this. LT scale, enter. 192, enter. Oh, look at that. It actually worked this time. If it hadn't worked, I would have taken 192 and I would have divided that by 2 and gotten 96. I would have tried 96. And then if that hadn't worked, I would have tried 48. If that hadn't worked, I would have done 24, right? So I would have just kind of kept halving them until something worked, right? So my lines look dashed. I'm going to go back to my print preview. Little hint. I can go to previous plot right here, and it goes back to all the settings of the previous dialog box, or a previous print for this dialog box. I'm going to preview. Looks wonderful, right? And that would be the PDF that you're going to submit. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Okay, let's run through one more, and and that will be the other portion of the assignment actually. So I'm going to draw this one as well. There's a slight difference in this one from the first one in that we have some curves that we need to draw. All right, so we're going to talk about that. But all of these other lines, they all follow the same convention as the first site plan, right? But there are the angles, so we'll talk, or the curves, so we will talk about that. All right, so this one, if you've done it in class, I would save it because you can submit this for your assignment. So I'm gonna open up a new one actually. So I've just opened up a brand new drawing again. We're gonna start this site plan from scratch. Let's see. Oop. Draw this site plan. Do not add the text or dimensions. Create 2 layers, one for the border and one for the chords. The chords are these dashed lines. Use proper AIA names. Use a dash line type for the chords. There's an actual dashed line type that we can load to use that. Start drawing the drawing at 0, 0 in the lower corner here, and we'll determine the plot scale required to print this 11 by 17. All right, so a couple things about drawing site plans with curves. All right. Oop. If you have a site plan with just kind of a straight segment, we still have a length and we still have a bearing. Great. Okay, so we know how to draw those. When it comes to drawing curves, which are all over the place, right, and property lines, the way that we're going to go about drawing this is we're going to draw what's called a chord. So this chord is that segment of this curve. This chord right here to here is for this curve, and this chord right here is for this curve. Okay, so we're going to draw these chords first, and then once those are all drawn, we're going to go back and we're going to draw the curves on here. Now the way that this functions is that instead of putting sort of the entire bearing next to a curve, and I think this might be semi-outdated, I think some people still use it but not everyone, but we're going to look at the curve table that is provided here to draw these curves. So we know that we have a 39.80 length on this curve number 1, but we don't have a bearing. So curve number one, we have a chord angle of south 25 degrees, 23 minutes, 5 seconds west with a chord length of 39.80. And this arc that's going to generate that curve has a radius of 55 feet. Okay. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to draw this entire property boundary. And then when I get to here, right, I'm going to draw the chord. And I'm going to look to the curve table to find the bearing for that chord. I'm going to draw that. Then I'm going to draw this second chord. I'm going to look at the curve table for the bearing and the length. I'm going to draw this third chord. I'm going to look up here for the angle, the bearing, and the length. And then I'm going to finish up drawing this. And then I'm going to go back and draw the curves. Okay. Now, before I get going, I like to, again, analyze this and make sure I'm drawing it the best way possible. So I look at it and I say, well, okay, so from here to here is northeast. Okay, that looks good. From here to here is northwest. Okay, so that's kind of already given me a direction on drawing it, right? I'm going to start here and move in this direction instead of starting here and moving this direction, right? Because if I start here and I head southeast, that works. But if I start here and want to move that direction, southeast doesn't work, okay? All right, So let's draw this. I'm gonna zoom in. Okay, so we will create a couple new layers. Let's go to layers. This is a good review of everything. So C dash property line. And in this case, the property line is going to be a continuous line. So we'll set it to red, but we will leave the line type continuous. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to create, enter, and create a second new layer. And this layer is going to be called C dash chord. And that one is going to be, maybe we can make it or cyan again. And this one is going to have a dashed line weight, line type. That's what it said on the instructions. So I click on continuous. I'm going to load a line type. And I'm going to choose the dashed line type. So I hit OK. Oh. I'm going to click on dashed, hit OK. And now that is a dashed line weight. All right, so I'm ready to draw now. I'm going to go back to my property line layer, make that current so that that's the layer I'm drawing on. And I'm going to start drawing. I'm going to start at point 0, 0. So again, always my intention to start to draw with the polyline. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But PL, polyline, enter. And I'm going to start at 0, 0, 0, 0, enter. Okay. My first bearing is going to be at 187.53 at an angle of north 36 degrees, 19 minutes, 40 seconds east. Looks good. Uh-oh, I almost made a fatal flaw here. Yep.
Are we supposed to be doing this in decimal?
Yes. As I went to hit enter, I noticed I was not in decimal. So I need to check my units first and make sure that these are all in decimal. Okay. Surveyor units. There we go. Good catch, right? All right. If I would have hit enter, nothing would have happened, essentially, right? Or wouldn't have been correct. So it would have been probably pretty immediately known that something was wrong. So I'm going to do that again. PL polyline, 0, 0, enter, at 187.53 at an angle of north 36 degrees, 19 minutes, 40 seconds east. Okay, there we go. So I come to here and I think, should I draw across? Well, it's southwest, so technically I could, but I also have this line to draw. So you could draw that one across, but I think for me, I prefer kind of just to do this line first. So I come back over here, I'm going to type at 148.47 at an angle of north 57 degrees, 0 minutes, 30 seconds west. There we go. I've got this little line segment. So I'm going to type at 10.25 at an angle of north 17 degrees, 30 minutes, 0 seconds east. Okay. Got my line here. It says west. So with west, that means that it doesn't have any incline or decline on it, right? There's no angle on it. So it's going to be exactly straight, which I can achieve by turning ortho on. Move in that direction, west, 130.28. Enter. Oh, come on, right? I'm going to hit escape. Oh, shoot, I was almost there. I hit escape too soon. I have to start my polyline again. Okay. I'm going to turn my ortho back off. I'm going to type at 25.26 at an angle of south 17 degrees, 6 minutes, 6 seconds west. Looks good. Okay. All right, so now here I am. I'm going to hit escape. I've gotten all the way around to the chords, which I'm going to draw. But before I do that, I'm going to change my layer.
For some reason, I can't make the west line.
You can't make the west line?
Yeah.
Well, let's see.
Oh, it just did it.
There you go. I don't think you have your ortho on though. So
Oh.
it's kind of crooked.
Okay.
Yeah, turn your ortho on and do it again. Okay. So let's draw our first chord. And this is our first chord. I'm going to make sure I have my chord layer selected, which I do. And now I'm going to need to use this is curve number 3, letter 3. So I'm going to use C3 for my bearings and my chord length. So PL, polyline, click, and I'm going to type at C3, which is 26.22 at an angle of south 39 degrees, 33 minutes, 29 seconds east. Okay. Now I have my chord number 2. Okay. So that one is at south, 78.24 at an angle of south 41 degrees, 9 minutes, 52 seconds east. Okay. Looks good so far. My third chord is C1. So I'm going to type at 39.80 at an angle of south 25 degrees, 23 minutes, 5 seconds west. And again, it's very tempting just to come down here, but we can't do it. We can't do it, right? I'm going to switch back over to my property line layer and finish up that. Well, I have this line and I have this line across the middle. L for line or polyline PL, enter. And I'm going to type at 141.07 at an angle of south 43 degrees, 24 minutes, 9 seconds east. Okay, looks good. And again, I have this one property boundary going right across the center, which again, it's very tempting just to draw it that way, but we want to catch mistakes that are, you know, before they're out building. So I'm going to type at 191.38 at an angle of south 86 degrees, 12 minutes, 55 seconds west. And it works. Everything looks good. We just have those arcs to draw. We have those curves on our site plan to draw. And we're going to do that by using the arc command, right? My favorite. Chord 1, right? Or curve 1, sorry. That one has a radius of 55 degrees. 55, see now, look what it's doing to me. 55 feet, right? So it's going to be 55, essentially. Curve 2 has the same, and curve 3 has a 16-foot, okay, radius. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to show you a couple things, right? So I'm going to, for curve number 1, I'm going to know that my radius is 55, and I'm going to use the arc tool. So I'm going to come up here to the arc command, and I'm going to choose, let's see, we want start, end, angle. Because we have a start point, we have an end point, oh, not angle, sorry, radius, start, end, radius. We have a start point, we have an end point, and we have a radius, right? And this isn't one of the arcs that we went over, we just went over these first 3, but it really functions exactly like those first few, other than you're inputting a radius at the end, okay? So start, end, radius. But I want to show you how to draw these. I want to show you how drawing these in different ways does different things, right? If I start here, So arc, specify the start point. Click. Arc, specify the end point. Click. Okay, arc, specify the radius. The radius is going to be 55. Okay, that worked. And it looks like it should. But let me show you something else. If I click on arc and I choose start end radius, and I started here and I ended here, and I typed in 55, it went the opposite direction, right? Because we have that right hand rule where if you're going in the counterclockwise direction, it's going to be a positive arc, and if you're going the counter or the clockwise direction, it's going to be negative. Okay, and so and again, I feel like this is even confusing as a topic for me, right? I have a hard time visually sensing it, but it's hard for me to look at this and say I'm going this direction, start, end, and that is positive, right? As opposed to I'm going this direction and that's negative. Okay, so I guess my best advice on these is if you do it wrong the first time, just switch what you did the first time and it'll be right the second time, right? That's my philosophy. So I'm going to choose start end radius and click, 55, enter, right? And then we have C2 here, which has a 55-foot radius. So arc, click, there's an endpoint, right? 55, enter. We want this one to go the opposite way. So we're going to arc, click, 55, enter. And if I had done it, oh, is that 55? Oh, 16. I was like, that doesn't look right. Whoops. Let's do that again. Arc, click, 16. There we go. That looks right. All right. So that's how you're going to draw curves. Essentially, you're going to draw the chord, right, which designates the start and the end, and then you're going to draw an arc to connect them. And all that information will be contained. It's either, I've seen it two different ways. Maybe those of you that are civil engineers can, tell us more, but I've seen it either on a curve table, or I think more recently I've seen it just with a leader that points to it, right? So there's no curve table, but there is a note that says the bearing, the distance, and what curve it is with a little arrow pointing to it, right? So you could see it that way as well. But essentially, there is our second property boundary, right? So what's our final step with this? To scale it. That's right. Everybody was afraid. Right? So we're going to scale it now, okay? Because, and let me say this, if you were going to use it in a civil application, it's correct. But if you're going to use it architecturally, right, with architectural units in mind, we have to scale it. And to practice that, we're going to be scaling all of these for our assignments. So SC, enter, or I could come up here to scale, click. Select the objects I want to scale, click. When I'm done selecting, I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to click a base point, click, and type 12. 12, enter, and it scaled it up by a factor of 12. Okay. I'm going to now, because I've just scaled it, it's not decimal format anymore, it's architectural. So I'm going to change that to architectural. And now if I were drawing a building or doing something to that effect, I could draw it on here and it would be the correct units to do that. Okay. Now, I need to print this. Well, almost final step. I need to print this, but my chords, they're not dashed, and I want them to look dashed. So I first need to determine the scale factor, which I can only do by looking at what the print's going to be. And then I need to change the LT scale, right? So let's do a quick print preview, take a look at it, figure out the scale, and then set our LT scale. So Adobe PDF, we'll do our 11 by 17. We'll choose window. We're gonna drop that on a window here. Center the plot. We're going to make this portrait. and then check fit to paper and see what scale works best. I'm going to try 1/32 again. That looks pretty good. If I bump it up and say, oh, let's try 1/16. Oop, too big. That doesn't work. So we want this to be 1/32. I'm going to preview it. But I don't see any dashed lines here, which I very much want to see. So I'm going to hit escape. Escape again. And I'm going to change my LT scale. And we had looked before, right? The LT scale for 1/32 was 384. So half of that is 192. So I'm going to come over here to my drawing. LT scale, enter, 192, enter, and there you go, right? It makes those dashed lines look appropriate for the scale we're printing at. Now, I want to say this about LT scale. LT scale, it's not a setting that's going to mess up your AutoCAD, right? It may affect how your dashed lines appear, but it's one of those settings you can change, you know, constantly, and nothing is going to get messed up. It's not like you're setting a view and changing the actual view. You're just visually making it look a certain way, right? So don't worry about changing it 15 times and having something be wrong. It's not going to happen, okay? So don't be afraid. Change your LT scale. We're going to print preview again. We're going to do our little secret previous plot. Preview that. And it looks pretty good, right? There's our dashed lines. The property boundaries are all correct, right? We don't know how to do text yet, but we will next week. So I'm going to hit OK, and we can create a PDF of that. Looks pretty good. All right. Any questions so far? Not terrible stuff, right? All right. So here I'm not gonna do this final one. This is a third site plan that you'll have to draw for your homework. So I'll let you guys do this on your own. But I do want to talk through it just a little bit. Okay. Because there is one sticky point in here. And that is the idea of the bearings, right? So when I draw this, there's a few things I'm going to have to think about, right? And I want to talk about those. I'm going to have to think about what direction I'm drawing this at, number one. I'm going to think about, do I draw this with polyline, or yes or no? Those are really the two things that I'm first going to think about. So I look at my starting point, and I look this direction, and that's northeast. So that does go northeast, so that looks like it's going to be probably the right way to go, right? But I look over here next, northwest. Okay, so that, you know, northwest is that direction. So if I was drawing from here that way, it might slightly incline to the northwest, right? It's not very visible, but that is likely. So it looks like I'm going to be drawing from here up to there, and then I'm going to have some curves, one curve, two curves. Then I'm going to have this line, another curve, okay, and then I'm going to go this direction. Likely I'm going to draw this, draw that, okay, and then I'll have my property boundaries created, okay. So if I had drawn this whole thing as a polyline, it would make it very easy for me to then offset this 10 to get that 10-foot setback. Okay, that makes sense. But I also have this line out here, okay? So if I have this a polyline and I offset it in, but then I know that I have to take this line and offset it 30 feet, if I have a polyline that's joined, it's gonna offset every single one of those 4 lines all the way around it, right? Makes sense? So I don't want to offset all of those lines, so what could I do to break those apart? I could explode them, right? So this exercise I feel like is really good about you thinking, going back and forth between joining lines and then exploding them to achieve your desired results, right? So I'm going to draw this as a polyline, and if it doesn't end up being an entire polyline, I will p-edit it to join it back together to get this offset, yes. But then it's not completely against the rules to say, well, I made it a polyline and I really like the polyline, right? But I have to explode it to then offset that line, right? So you're going to join them. Yep.
Can I go through the exploding thing one more time?
Yeah, let's do that. It's really easy. So if this is a polyline, well, I didn't join it. Oop, I forgot to join it. To explode, I'm going to click explode, or I'm going to type X. I'm going to select the object I want to explode and hit enter. That's it. So it seems counterintuitive, right? You're like, well, I created a polyline. Maybe I had to even join it to then offset it to then explode it so I could offset it a different way, right? Totally valid. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. So create it, join it, offset it in, then explode it, and then offset it out. Okay. That's one thing I wanted to bring your attention to. The other thing I wanted to bring your attention to is this curve right here. It's kind of tricky. Okay. And I'm just going to show you, I said I wasn't going to draw it, but I'm going to draw the very first line segment with this, and I'm going to show you something, okay? So I'm going to draw this first line segment. 0, 0. It's probably going to end up, yep, I'm going to delete that. All that homework. Okay, and I'm going to type, oh, let's undo this so we get back to decimal. There we go. L for line, enter, 0, 0, enter. I'm going to type at 183.580, bless you, at an angle of north 29 degrees, 56 minutes, 4 seconds east. Okay, I look at my chord table here, and I have number 22. So that's northwest. So if I were to draw that here, I would type at, because I know I have to draw a chord length and then come back after the fact and draw the arcs. I'm going to type at 67.424 at an angle of north 70 degrees, 33 minutes, 55 seconds west. So it's tricky because it went up the right way, but then it shot off that direction, which makes sense because C22, that says northwest, northeast, southwest. Okay, so it's going to go that direction. And then I start rethinking this, and I think, well, maybe I should have drawn this direction that way. But if I go northwest, it's still that direction, right? What's happened here is the line is the right bearing, and it's the right length, all right? So I guess what you could do here, there's two things you could do here. I could take this line, I could grab it, M for move, and I can move it from here to there. That accomplishes what I need to have happen. So essentially what I've done by moving it is I've taken the line that has been drawn correctly and moved it into the right spot, which is kind of the same thing as drawing this saying 67.424 at an angle of south 70 degrees, 33 minutes, 55 seconds east, right? The bearing, 70 degrees, 33 minutes, 55 seconds is the same. The length is the same, but whether it's northwest or southeast, right? It matters in terms of what direction it's going, but it's still going to be the same line segment. It's confusing.
Just put south and east instead of.
Yes.
You can either move it or do south and east.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Tricky, right? Yeah. So that is, and I think that that is really the only spot that is tricky in this assignment, right? Well, Jeff, the little trickster, doing that, but it makes you think, right? So the line is the same. I mean, the line is correct. You could have changed the bearing from south or from north to south and from west to east, or you could just take it and move it over and you would accomplish the same thing. Okay. So you'll draw it up, you'll go down here, you'll draw your second chord, you'll draw this line, that next chord, and then when you're all done drawing everything, you're going to come back and don't forget that C22 has an arc associated with it, and that arc has a 185 foot radius. So you're going to not have these be straight. These are actually chords. You're going to draw an arc, right? And it's going to be very shallow, just like this one. So in this case right here, you have a chord going from here straight to there. That's this line. And when you draw the arc, it's going to be a very gentle, large radius arc right there. Okay. So your assignment will be to draw this, and I won't have these due until after, I'm trying to think. We're going to learn text. Well, I won't have them due before next time we meet, right? Because we're going to learn text. But I'm honestly just debating on whether or not I probably just give you all next week because I won't be here Wednesday. So I'll probably have these, you'll have next week to work on all of these while I'm gone. So I'll make these due. Let's make them due on the 25th. Okay, so we'll talk about text on the 13th. And then I'll just give you that time to work on these things while I'm gone. So you'll have those 3 drawings and you'll have a text assignment to do while I'm away. Any other questions on any of this stuff? Okay, so next time we'll talk about creating some text and you'll be able to do that. All right.